Let's not waste any time on fantasies tonight. You're not striding down the marble halls of the Senate, nor lounging in a scented bath while servants peel grapes for you. No, not tonight. Tonight, you'll plunge straight into the relentless hum of Roman life as just another nameless resident. No emperor's signet ring, no poet's laurels, just you, stripped of all modern comforts, blinking awake in a world that doesn't care if you haven't had your coffee. And before you settle in, go ahead and hit that like button and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy having your illusions about history shattered. And drop a comment, letting me know where on earth and in time you're joining from. I love seeing if anyone's listening from a place with better plumbing than Rome. Dim the lights, maybe switch on a fan to drown out your neighbor's latest TikTok. Prepare to step back into a reality where the only thing soft is the bread, if you can call it that. Your eyes snap open to a cacophony that could wake the dead. Someone shouting down the hall, a rooster crowing with the confidence of someone who doesn't pay rent, and a baby wailing as if it's already realized it's been born into ancient Rome. Congratulations, you're alive, technically, in a Roman insula, the era's answer to the modern apartment complex. Imagine the world's least regulated apartment block, stacked 5 or 6 stories high, built by a man who thought safety was for cowards. If you're on the 3rd or 4th floor, you're not just unlucky, you're a living statistic in a vertical lottery of misery. The higher you go, the cheaper the rent, the more creative the leaks, and the greater your odds of being crushed when the ceiling above you finally gives up. Your living space is about as generous as a Roman tax collector. Picture a stone box barely wide enough to stretch out in, walls oozing with condensation in the summer and radiating frost in the winter. You squint at the single sliver of daylight squeezing through a hole in the wall. Window would be too generous a word. It's just enough for a pigeon to occasionally drop by and remind you that nature always wins. The mattress beneath you is a collection of straw, lice, and every regret you've ever had, all wrapped in a wool blanket that's somehow both perpetually damp and itching with possibilities. There's no table, no art, and certainly no kitchen. Cooking is strictly forbidden. One spark and the whole block is up in flames, faster than the senator's reputation. You possess exactly 3 things: a battered clay cup, a threadbare tunic that's seen better centuries, and, if you're living large, a wooden comb so rough it doubles as a weapon. Bathroom? Not in your wildest dreams. No flush, no sink, not even the dignity of a wooden bucket with a lid. Your chamber pot sulks in the corner, silently judging your life choices. Once it's full, you're forced to navigate the world's most treacherous staircase, slick, twisted, and so narrow you start to question how the Romans ever conquered anything. You pray you make it to the street gutter without slipping and becoming part of the city's morning runoff. The walls are so thin you can hear your neighbor's every prayer, cough, argument, and, let's just say, moments of marital harmony. Every breath is flavored with the aroma of mildew, wood smoke, and the collective body odor of a city that's never heard of deodorant. Somewhere below you, a baker is already slinging bread into a stone oven. But let's not kid ourselves. You're not on the guest list. Instead, the street is alive with vendors hawking figs and the less appetizing parts of yesterday's catch. You catch a whiff of fish guts and desperation as a centurion's voice drifts in, barking orders at someone who probably started bleeding before breakfast. You haven't even left your cell-like room, and already your skin is sticky, your scalp itches, and you're probably inhaling more lead than a modern plumber would see in a lifetime. Welcome to your Roman morning. You're not the star of this story. You're not the hero, or even the plucky sidekick. You're one of tens of thousands crammed into a city that runs on sweat, hope, and the vague threat of divine retribution. Your main goal is simple. Avoid falling down the stairs, angering a city god, or being noticed by anyone with more power than you, which is almost everyone. And yes, you've got a full day ahead. Only 23 more hours to go. Now, let's address the pressing issue, the one that's been gnawing at you since you opened your eyes, your bladder. No, you can't handle it privately. There are no bathrooms in your apartment, and absolutely no such thing as a flush. Modesty is a luxury for the rich and the dead, gripping your chamber pot with one hand and your dignity with the other. You shuffle through the streets toward the nearest communal latrina. And communal is being charitable. The Roman public toilet is where privacy goes to die and awkwardness thrives. You step inside and face a long stone bench pocked with evenly spaced holes, each one an open invitation to humility. Beneath the seat, a shallow stream does its best to carry away the city's shame, but mostly just moves it around. You hover, squat, or sit, depending on your risk tolerance, and immediately regret the eye contact from the man across from you. No doors, no stalls, and absolutely no boundaries. Here, conversation flourishes in the worst possible context. Businessmen debate grain prices while squatting. A retired soldier grumbles about his aching back. You do your best not to make eye contact with the guy eating olives, as if nothing is wrong. Then comes the pièce de résistance, the infamous tersorium. It's a communal sponge on a stick, soaking in what might be vinegar, or just the ghosts of 1,000 users. You give it a perfunctory rinse, say a silent prayer, and get on with your day, hoping you never meet any of these people at the market. If you're lucky, you brought your own rag. If you're rich, maybe a handful of moss. But let's be honest, you're neither. You use what's there, and you carry the memory with you, wedged next to your dwindling pride. Think you can skip the latrina and sneak into an alley. Think again. Roman law is clear, and fines are steep. The city's enforcers are not known for their sense of humor. Washing your hands. That's a modern luxury. There's only a communal basin, filled with more microbial history than the Colosseum floor. You dip your fingers, feel no cleaner, and leave the latrina lighter in spirit, but heavier in existential dread. Welcome to hygiene, Roman style. With your morning ordeal behind you, the next stop is breakfast. Except, in Rome, breakfast is less meal and more ritual humiliation. The Roman ientaculum is a study in culinary austerity, stale bread and wine diluted until it's just one step above tap water. Cheese? Maybe. Olives? If you're lucky. Mostly, it's disappointment, served cold. Forget about eggs, bacon, or anything resembling a pancake. Coffee? The closest you'll come is chewing on a burnt crust and pretending it's an oat milk latte. The bread, panis rusticus, is dense, tooth-chipping, and about as tasty as the paving stones outside. You gnaw on it, wondering if the Romans invented dentistry just to survive breakfast. The wine is so watered down, even a toddler could handle it, though, with Roman parenting, they probably do. If you're a connoisseur, maybe you dab a little garum on your bread. Garum, for the uninitiated, is fermented fish sauce so pungent it could strip the paint off a chariot. Congratulations, you've just invented sadness with a side of salt. If you're wealthy, fruit and honey might grace your table, but you're not. You're just well off enough to be free, and just poor enough to wish you weren't. Sometimes a vendor strolls by, with fresh chickpea fritters or honey cakes, and for a fleeting moment you believe in hope. Then you check your coin purse and remember, the only thing emptier than your stomach is your wallet. So you stand in the street or squat by a fountain, chewing on bread as tough as a legionnaire's sandal, surrounded by other bleary-eyed citizens, all pretending this is normal. If you're feeling optimistic, you imagine the bread is cake. If you're realistic, you just hope it doesn't crack a tooth. This is breakfast in Rome. Carbs, dehydration, and the realization that you have to walk miles in sandals before the sun reaches its full, merciless height. Now, with breakfast behind you and the vague taste of disappointment lingering, it's time to face the workday. Rome does not believe in leisure for the masses. Unless you've inherited land, found a patron, or somehow convinced people you're a poet, you're headed to work. And work is never gentle. You might be hauling bricks, mixing mortar, scrubbing streets, making pots, or if you really pulled the short straw, cleaning the city's sewers. Rome is a city built on the backs of the ordinary. And today, that's literally you. Your day starts before the sun does. The foreman is already barking orders, waving a stick, and muttering threats in Latin. Being late means a docked wage, or, if you're really unlucky, a public beating. Rome's HR department is a guy with a stick and no patience. Your tools are as basic as your breakfast: a splintered shovel, a battered trowel, and the unspoken understanding that injury means unemployment, and unemployment means hunger. There are no gloves, no helmets, and absolutely no sympathy from anyone above you in the social pyramid. If you're a craftsman, your day isn't much brighter. You're competing with dozens of others, selling the same shoddy sandals, chipped pots, or threadbare tunics. Undercutting is rampant, and quality only matters if a richer customer decides to hold a grudge. Even the so-called white-collar jobs are a slog. Messengers dash through streets choked with carts and livestock, clutching scrolls and dodging insults. Accountants scribble figures for bosses who won't remember their faces. Teachers attempt to wrangle senators' children who already believe they're descended from gods. Women aren't spared the grind. They spin, weave, haggle at the market, manage the household, and raise children, all while hoping not to die in childbirth. Multitasking isn't a trend, it's a matter of survival. And just when you think you've earned a break, your supervisor decides today is the day to impress a visiting official. Lunch? Maybe, if you're lucky or invisible. So this is the real Rome, not marble palaces, but the relentless churn of bodies, sweat, and ambition. You work, or you risk starvation. Eternity may belong to the city, but your back is already sending you warning signals. And the day is still young. If you're still with me, congratulations. You've survived the Roman morning, the choking air of the insula, the indignities of the communal latrina, the despair of breakfast, and the boot camp that is the workday. You're not special, but you're alive. And in Rome, that's no small achievement. Stick around, because the next chapter is about to make you grateful for every vaccination, soap dispenser, and private bathroom you've ever had. Spoiler alert, things are about to get a lot messier. So you've made it through the morning without fainting or being flogged. Congratulations, you survived the Roman morning so far. Now the real challenge begins, navigating the streets of ancient Rome, a living, breathing game of survival, where the odds are stacked firmly against your continued cleanliness, sanity, and general well-being. Imagine stepping out of your insula and immediately being swallowed by a tide of humanity and livestock. The city is vibrating with noise and movement, but it's not the charming hum of a cosmopolitan metropolis. Instead, it's more like getting dropped into Times Square at rush hour. Only the air smells like sweat, smoke, and something far less poetic. And there's a decent chance you'll get trampled by a runaway goat. Look around you. The street is a mosaic of chaos. Rats dart along the curbs. Stray dogs nose through piles of refuse. And children weave between haggling merchants, their sticky fingers already plotting the theft of your last copper coin. Beggars stretch out hands in 6 different dialects, and fishmongers screech about the freshness of their catch, or, more likely, the dubious state of their eels. If you thought you'd find peace in the crowd, think again. This is social anxiety with a toga. Now, let's talk about those famous Roman roads. Yes, they were marvels of engineering, built to last centuries. perfectly straight and expertly paved. But here in the city, these roads double as a sort of open-air compost heap. Streams of urine, spilled wine, animal dung, and whatever passed for last night's leftovers all flow together down the center channel, forming a river of misery. Step off the raised footpath without looking, and you're baptized instantly in Rome's finest street marinade. It's a daily lottery for your sandals and your dignity. Wagons and carts add their own thrill to the experience. There are no traffic lights, no crosswalks, and drivers operate as if they've never heard of brakes. During the day, heavy carts are technically banned, but that just means at night, the streets become a shadowy racetrack for insomniac charioteers, careening through the darkness while you squint desperately for a gap in the chaos. If you manage not to get flattened by a cart, odds are you'll still be elbowed aside by a basket-laden vendor or whacked by a patrician servant ushering a very surly monkey. The air itself is a hazard. You're breathing in a thick stew of smoke from cook fires, incense drifting from temple doors, and the unmistakable aroma of public latrines, perfumed, if you're lucky, with a hint of rotting cabbage and last night's fish sauce disaster. Every so often, the wind picks up and delivers a bonus, the scent of a dead animal, ignored by all but the most fastidious. If a dog collapses in the forum, most folks just throw a rag over it and keep walking. Why ruin your day with a little corpse? Public spectacles bring their own brand of disorder. The street might suddenly clog with a parade of trumpet players, each determined to play a different tune, or a political rally that erupts into a shoving match over who has the gaudiest laurel wreath. Fights break out with little warning, sometimes over a spilled amphora, sometimes over a disputed prophecy, or occasionally because someone insulted a senator's pet monkey. Every block is a new episode of reality television, minus the cameras and with much worse hygiene. Your path is a gauntlet of hazards. Slip on a squashed fig, get sideswiped by a market basket, or accidentally offend the wrong glowering aristocrat. And your day could end with a trip to the forum's equivalent of urgent care, meaning a bench, a dirty rag, and the dubious mercy of the gods. All this, and you just wanted to buy a handful of lentils. By noon, you're sweaty, dust-caked, and dreaming of a cold drink. But the city has other plans. Now, here comes the great Roman pride, the aqueducts. These stone giants snake across the hills, carrying fresh water into the city. But unless you're living in a marble-clad domus, with a private fountain gurgling in your atrium, your water comes from public fountains, shared with every other resident and their assorted germs. The process is simple. You line up, scoop your ration, and try not to think too hard about how many feet, hands, and hopeful children have been dunked in the basin before you. Hygiene, in this context, is more of a theory than a practice. If you want to truly wash up, you head to the baths, the thermae. They're everywhere, and everyone uses them, from senators to beggars. Imagine a giant steamy social club where no one believes in modesty, and half the crowd is loudly debating politics or selling you questionable socks. You soak in warm, shared water, which cycles through the pools with no soap, no chlorine, and exactly as much shame as you'd expect from a civilization obsessed with public nudity. By the end, you feel less dirty but somehow more suspicious of your own skin. Let's not forget the lead pipes. Romans adored their plumbing, but they didn't quite grasp that piping water through lead might have consequences. Over time, the lead seeps into the water, gifting citizens with a delightful cocktail of ailments, anemia, gout, infertility, and, if you're really lucky, a touch of lead-induced madness. So when you raise a cup, you're gambling with every sip. Most Romans, wise to the risks, treat water with suspicion. Instead, everyone drinks wine, diluted and consumed at every meal by adults and children alike. It's not about getting tipsy, it's about avoiding whatever lurks in the public fountains. The reality: you're surviving the empire with a gentle buzz. hoping that grape juice will save you from the city's invisible perils. But even the best engineering can't soften the background hum of pain in Roman life. There are no painkillers, no ice, not even the sweet mercy of coffee to dull the edges. You stub your toe, you grit your teeth, and you keep walking until it either heals crooked or drops off entirely. Break a bone? You wrap it up, say a prayer, and try not to cough too hard. Get a splinter? That's a potential death sentence, because infection is always lurking nearby, waiting to turn your bad day into a permanent holiday. Comfort is for the gods and the wealthy. The tools you use every day are built for durability, not ergonomics, and the seats are as hard as the bread. If you're a laborer, you haul bricks until your muscles scream. If you're a soldier, you march 20 miles and consider yourself fortunate if you only get a single blister and a mild snakebite. For women in childbirth, pain is a given, and the best midwife might offer a chant, but little else. Every injury is a gamble, and recovery is neither quick nor guaranteed. When disaster strikes, your options are limited. There's no anesthesia, so surgery means biting down on a block of wood, while a man with dubious qualifications and a stained toga gets to work with his collection of bronze tools. Antiseptics? Maybe a splash of wine or vinegar, which both cleanse and punishes the wound. If infection sets in, you're handed a concoction of honey, garlic, or the sort of herbal paste that's one ingredient away from being livestock feed. If things go truly sideways, you might be told to sleep in a temple and pray to Asclepius for a miraculous cure. The gods are always the final recourse, especially when the local doctor throws up his hands and starts suggesting you dream your way to health. And if you die, well, your neighbors start wondering what kind of omen your untimely demise might spell for their own fortunes. It's not that Romans didn't care about health. They just hadn't cracked the code on what actually worked. The result is a daily dance with danger, where survival depends on luck, stubbornness, and a willingness to accept pain as the price of existence. So next time you sneeze, thank modern medicine, and be glad your doctor doesn't open a vein at the first sign of trouble. With all that in mind, you make your way home, battered, thirsty, and probably a little bit contaminated. You survived the Roman streets and the gauntlet of public health, but the day isn't over yet. After a long day of sweating, bleeding, and dodging cards, you're starving. Now your stomach is howling like a wolf outside the city walls. Dinner time, except here in Rome, it's called cena. Don't get any hopeful ideas about pizza, pasta, or anything vaguely Italian, American. None of that exists. Rome's culinary landscape is a wild, uncharted territory, where your main course is whatever didn't run away fast enough or spoil in the Mediterranean sun. You take a seat on a wobbly wooden stool and stare down at your meal, a bowl of brown, steaming mush. It's pulse, spelt, beans, or lentils, pounded into a porridge so bland you'd swear it was invented by a committee of bureaucrats. If you're lucky, there's a stray sprig of herb in there, maybe a wilted leaf of something green, as if your taste buds needed proof that plants still exist. If you're not lucky, it's just the pulse, which tastes like the aftermath of a rainstorm in a gravel pit. Protein is a luxury, and in your household, it's about as common as a senator with a conscience. Meat costs a fortune, and the butcher's idea of freshness is anything that doesn't walk off the table by itself. Without refrigeration, everything gets salted, smoked, or, if you're feeling bold, drowned in garum, Rome's infamous fermented fish sauce. Just the smell could make a hardened legionary weep. Picture a sauce that combines rotten anchovies, sun-baked barrels, and a threat to your dignity. That's garum. If there's a festival, you might see a bowl of boiled vegetables, or a sliver of hard cheese that could double as a construction material. On truly special days, a wrinkled fig rolls onto your plate. If you were born into the upper crust, life is a circus of excess. The rich devour roast peacock, flamingo, dormouse stuffed with nuts, or even jellyfish marinated in vinegar. These are not meals, they're edible status updates. For everyone else, dinner is a lesson in humility and intestinal fortitude. Your wine, because yes, you do get wine, is always watered down. Drinking it straight is considered barbaric, which is ironic because the water itself is a microbial roulette. You're not choosing between tipsy and sober. You're choosing between a slow headache and a quick trip to the nearest latrine. For dessert, there's no chocolate, no sugar, and definitely no tiramisu. Maybe you get a handful of dried fruit, maybe a few nuts. Or maybe it's a religious fast day, and you get nothing except a vague sense of piety and a rumbling stomach. You finish your meal, wipe your greasy hands on a communal cloth that has seen more fingers than the city's censors, and breathe in the rich aroma of garlic, watered wine, and existential dread. Your tunic absorbs the rest. If you're feeling refined, you pretend not to notice the fact that your neighbor's hands were just where yours are now. By now, your belly is full, your breath is questionable, and your mood is somewhere between resigned and quietly desperate. But at least you've eaten, and in Rome, that's a minor miracle. Now, what do Romans do for fun after a meal? Brace yourself, because Roman entertainment is a high-octane mix of spectacle and survival. You'd think after a day of grime, toil, and fish sauce, you'd be entitled to a little peaceful relaxation, a soothing stroll perhaps, or a quiet chat with friends. But this is Rome. Leisure here is loud, violent, and almost always slightly terrifying. The Colosseum is the beating, blood-soaked heart of Roman entertainment. It's the place where thousands gather, their shouts echoing off the stone, to watch men fight to the death. Gladiators clash with swords and tridents, while wild animals, lions, bears, leopards, are unleashed to devour criminals or unlucky prisoners. If the emperor is feeling particularly theatrical, he might flood the arena for a full-scale naval battle. Real ships, real drowning, real applause. The best part: admission is free, because nothing unites the masses like violence, and nothing distracts from political corruption like a good old-fashioned beheading. You squeeze into the stands, shoulder to shoulder with sweaty strangers, cheering as a man loses a limb or a criminal gets mauled. You're not sure whether to feel entertained or unsettled, but you clap anyway, because anything else might make you stand out. If the Colosseum is too much, perhaps you prefer the subtler arts. The amphitheater offers drama and comedy, but subtlety is not on the bill. Roman plays are bawdy, slapstick affairs, filled with crude jokes and exaggerated gestures. If you understand the Latin, you might catch a pun about Jupiter's backside or Venus's love life. If not, you'll still get the gist from the audience's howling laughter. For those who crave speed and danger, the Circus Maximus is the place to be. Chariot races thunder around a dirt track at breakneck speeds. There are no guardrails, no helmets, and crashes are as inevitable as spilled wine at a banquet. The crowd screams, bets are placed, and allegiances to rival teams can turn violent. Choose your colors wisely, because the wrong cheer could land you in a fistfight before you even reach the exit. On the streets, the show never stops. Fire breathers, jugglers, musicians, and hustlers crowd every corner. Philosophers shout their manifestos at passers-by, hoping for an audience or just someone to argue with. If you're bored, wait 5 minutes. Someone will do something outrageous soon enough. Rome's true genius is not just in building aqueducts or roads, but in weaponizing spectacle. Every performance, every race, every play is designed to make you forget the cracks in your walls, the stench from the sewers, and the fact that tomorrow is likely to be just as hard as today. If you're still not numb, there's always more wine. But don't get too comfortable. The Roman legal system is lurking, and its idea of justice is not what you'd call reassuring. You might think that after surviving the workday, choking down dinner, and clapping for a gladiator's demise, you'd be safe from further misery. Think again. In Rome, justice is less about fairness and more about reminding you where you stand, which is firmly at the bottom of the social heap. Your legal fate depends almost entirely on your status. Citizens have rights, on paper. In reality, you can be flogged, fined, or exiled if you cross the wrong person. If you're not a citizen, justice is swift, brutal, and utterly indifferent. Slaves aren't even people in the eyes of the law. If one slave kills a master, every slave in the household might be executed, just to send a message, don't get any ideas. Trials are public theatre, literally. The rich show up with witnesses, bribes, and dramatic speeches. You arrive with nothing but your tunic and a desperate hope that crying on cue will help. If you have a patron, maybe you get a fair shake. If you don't, pray to Jupiter and hope the magistrate didn't drink too much last night. Punishments are designed to be memorable. Thieves get branded or have their hands broken. Liars might get their tongues pierced. Fraudsters are flogged, exiled, or, if they're lucky, simply ruined financially. Insult the emperor and you're not just going to jail, you're going to die. Often in a way that doubles as public entertainment. Crucifixion is popular not just for religious martyrs, but for anyone the state wants to make an example of, rebels, robbers, or anyone unlucky enough to get noticed. Law enforcement is a haphazard affair. The vigiles, Rome's underpaid, overworked urban police, are equal parts firefighter, night watch, and neighborhood extortionist. Get mugged? They might shrug, slip them a bribe, and suddenly they're your best friends. In Rome, laws are everywhere, but justice is for sale, and mercy is strictly optional. If you're searching for comfort, maybe you turn to the gods. After all, Rome is a city of shrines, temples, and rituals. But religious life here is less about private faith and more about public performance. The gods are everywhere, and there's a deity for everything: door hinges, boundaries, mildew, even the city's sewers. You can't walk down the street without bumping into a shrine or tripping over a sacrificial altar. Forget to bow, mumble a prayer, or make an offering, and you're inviting disaster, not just for yourself, but for the whole neighborhood. When your roof collapses or your crops fail, everyone knows it's because you skipped the right ritual. The religious calendar is jam-packed with festivals, Saturnalia, Lupercalia, and a dozen others each year. On festival days, business stops, animals are sacrificed, and the city fills with the smell of roasting meat and melting wax. You show up out of fear as much as faith, because if the gods aren't satisfied, they strike back with plagues, storms, or a bad barley harvest. Emperor worship is mandatory theatre. You're expected to offer incense at the emperor's altar, sing his praises, and never so much as smirk during a triumphal procession. Skip a ritual, and you're not just rude, you're suspicious. Suspicion is social poison in Rome. If you belong to a foreign cult, keep it a secret unless the state approves. Roman religion isn't about belief. It's about rituals, public displays, and making sure everyone sees you doing the right thing, even if your heart's not in it. Smile as you sacrifice that goat, because the gods and your neighbors are always watching. And speaking of performances, let's talk about social climbing. You've survived the gods, the law, and the baths. Now comes the real struggle, navigating Rome's social ladder. Picture a hierarchy greased with oil and lined with daggers. At the top are the senators, old money, purple-striped togas, and estates big enough to get lost in. Next, the equestrians, the business class, wealthy but not quite aristocratic. Then come the plebeians, the ordinary citizens like you, clawing for scraps and hoping for a lucky break. Below that, freedmen, slaves, foreigners, and the unluckiest of all, those who insulted a statue or spilled wine on the wrong senator. Want to move up? You need a patron, a powerful protector who demands loyalty, favors, and regular flattery. Each morning, you line up outside your patron's house for the salutatio, praising his haircut, complimenting his children's togas, and begging for a little help. If you're lucky, he throws you a coin or lets you carry his litter through the forum. Congratulations, you're now part of the ancient Roman networking machine. Everything is performance. Your clothes must be spotless, your speech measured, your friends carefully chosen. Show too much ambition, and you'll attract enemies. Rise too quickly, and you'll find yourself the target of rumors, plots, or worse. Gossip is the true currency of Rome, and one wrong word at a banquet can end your career. Marriages are not about love. They're about alliances, property, and family survival. The right match can save your bloodline. The wrong one can doom it for generations. Even if you claw your way up the ladder, don't get comfortable. One bad harvest, one missed ritual, one jealous rival, and you could lose everything, sometimes quite literally, overnight. The social climb in Rome is exhausting, perilous, and never-ending. And as the sun sinks, you might hope the chaos dies down. But in Rome, night only brings a new set of dangers and dramas. The city's shadows crawl with secrets, and survival is never guaranteed. The sun is slipping behind the tiled rooftops now, painting the city gold and red. But don't get too cozy. Next, we'll step into the Roman night, a world where the darkness is thick, the dangers are real, and only the toughest endure. The sun finally sinks behind Rome's ramshackle skyline, and as the last light bleeds away, you might feel a flicker of hope that the chaos will taper off. Maybe, just maybe, you'll get a genuine night of rest. Nice try. Night in ancient Rome isn't a gentle curtain falling on the day. It's a full-blown mood swing. The city doesn't unwind. It coils, tenses, and bares its teeth. Let's talk about lighting, or the stunning lack of it. Unless you're rolling in denarii and willing to burn expensive oil lamps until dawn, you're left to grope your way through pitch-black alleys. Most Romans rely on the moon, muscle memory, and the sort of hope that makes you question your life choices. You trip over a curb, and no one's going to help you up. If you're lucky, you'll still have your sandals by sunrise. The vigils, Rome's supposed night watch, are your only line of defense against disaster. In theory, they patrol the streets, extinguish fires, and keep the city safe. In practice, they're underpaid, outnumbered, and more invested in their next nap than your survival. A few are brave, most are bribable, and all are exhausted. Criminals are fully aware. The city's thieves, muggers, and the occasional out-of-work gladiator treat the night as their personal hunting ground. If you walk home alone, congratulations, you're the mark. Doesn't matter if you're young, old, male, female, or somewhere in between. If you aren't armed or invisible, someone's waiting to relieve you of your coin purse, dignity, or both. And then there's the ever-present dread, fire. The insulae, those towering, rickety apartment blocks where most of the city's population lives, are built from wooden beams, wishful thinking, and just enough break to fool you into complacency. Cooking after dark? Illegal, for good reason. But hunger doesn't care about the law, and neither does the neighbor who can't resist a midnight snack. A single lamp toppling over is all it takes to set an entire block ablaze. When fire comes, there's no warning, no alarms, no orderly evacuation. Just screams, smoke, and the desperate scramble to escape with whatever you can grab. Your tunic, your chamber pot, and whatever shreds of dignity survive the stampede. Let's step into the heart of the campaign, right as the air crackles with the kind of tension you can almost taste, like the moment before a thunderstorm. Except here, the lightning is about to crash straight through a rebel's front gate. picture yourself, not as a pampered courtier, but as one of the weary, dust-choked infantry trudging beside Rodigon, the princess who has never been mistaken for a decorative vase. The Parthian Empire, at first glance, looks like an endless stretch of power, marble palaces gleaming in the sun, banners snapping in the wind. But the truth, more patchwork than perfection, its reach held together by hurried deals, forced marriages, and the threat of the sword. It's an empire kept upright with spit, oaths, and a healthy dose of intimidation. So, when the western provinces started to smolder, with talk of rebellion, Media, Babylonia, places where the locals still remember a time before Parthian rule, no one gasped in shock. Rebellion was almost a seasonal event. But this time, it wasn't just a few angry villagers dodging taxes. This was an open defiance. City leaders and aristocrats locking the gates, sending envoys home in silence, and making it very clear the empire could fend for itself. They'd drawn a line in the sand, and for once, the central court couldn't just dispatch some second-rate cousin with more ambition than sense. Why? Because the times had shifted. Maybe the king was busy, maybe the generals were scattered, or maybe, just maybe, Rodigon saw an opportunity, not for glory, but for necessity. She didn't want gold or flattery, she wanted victory, and she wanted it visible. So she did what no one expected. She climbed onto her horse, donned armor that still smelled of old leather and fear, and made a vow so public, so wild, that it stuck in the minds of every soldier and servant. She'd refuse to wash, comb, or even touch her hair until the rebellion was ground into dust. Now, in a world where court stylists could spend hours debating the placement of a single braid, this was more than a personal challenge. It was a living symbol. Every inch of unwashed, tangled hair became a scoreboard for the campaign. Each day she rode out, her hair grew wilder, more defiant, a banner of stubbornness that no rebel could ignore. Soldiers didn't just follow her orders, they followed her example. She wasn't hiding behind silk curtains or giving orders from the comfort of a perfumed chamber. She was in the dirt with them, sweat mingling with dust, her hair turning into a kind of battle flag no enemy could mistake. The rebels, expecting a pampered noble with a retinue of fussy attendants, instead got a woman whose hair and demeanor were both terrifyingly unkempt. Jokes spread that even the local lice had begun to desert. You could almost hear the groans from the empire's stylists echoing all the way to Babylon. But what looked like a mess was actually a masterstroke. Rodigon's vow became legend in real time, a living, breathing signal that this war wasn't over until every knot was undone, every rebel broken. The campaign itself was no parade. You, as one of her troops, would have felt the grind. The rebel cities weren't cowed by threats. Their walls were thick, their gates iron-banded, their spirits high. The usual bribes and treaties did nothing. Instead, Rodigon turned to the tried-and-true tactics of Parthian warfare, mobility, deception, and a patience born from years of palace intrigue. She sent out scouts who slipped through enemy lines like shadows. Her cavalry vanished and reappeared, striking at weak points, turning the rebels' confidence into confusion. Every raid was a lesson in improvisation, and every setback a reminder that the empire wasn't finished yet. Rodigon didn't command from a distance. She was in the thick of it, mud on her boots, grit in her teeth, her hair now so tangled it looked as if it might start catching arrows. Her soldiers began to see her not just as a leader, but as the embodiment of everything they were fighting for. She was proof that pride and pain could walk side by side. The longer the campaign dragged on, the more mythic her hair became. By the third month, it had become its own character, a wild, snarled testament to endurance, whispered about in the same breath as the fate of the siege. Among the rebels, Rodigon's reputation warped into something almost supernatural. They started calling her the Witch Queen, convinced that no proper woman would still be in the field, unwashed, unsleeping, undaunted. Tales sprang up in the enemy camps. Some swore her hair was turning to iron. Others claimed she didn't sleep, just stood in the darkness, eyes burning with the promise of victory. These rumors did more than any sword to undermine rebel morale. Every time a rebel peered over the battlements and caught sight of that unkempt mane, they saw the living proof that this wasn't a war of attrition. It was a test of will, and Rodigan's was unbreakable. But there was nothing magical about her progress, just relentless discipline and a refusal to blink first. As the campaign moved from city to city, Rodigan's forces cut off supply lines, intercepted messengers, and drove wedges between the rebel commanders. Instead of reckless assaults, she favored slow strangulation, starvation, isolation, psychological warfare. She turned the passage of days into a weapon, letting the enemy rot in their own doubts. You can almost hear her muttering, "Let them stew." When the army at last encircled the final rebel stronghold, the anticipation was thick enough to chew. The city, rumored to be a fortress no army could breach, was stuffed with hoarded supplies and lined with nervous archers. The rebel leaders believed they could outlast her, praying that the princess's resolve, or hygiene, would finally crack. But Rodigan only doubled down. By now, her appearance had become an empire-wide legend. Even the children in the markets played games, pretending to be the woman who wouldn't wash, chasing each other with wild hair and makeshift swords. Jokes flew in the tents of her army that the true terror wasn't putty and steel. It was the prospect of Rodigan never bathing again. The pattern interrupts. Here are as sharp as ever. Imagine being a rebel, waiting for siege towers, and instead finding your greatest foe is a princess whose hair is now a national crisis. The myth grew with every passing day. Some soldiers even swore that when the wind blew, her hair appeared to move on its own, like a living omen of doom. But behind the laughter was real respect. Rodigan shared the same cold meals, grainy bread that could break teeth, wine that tasted like wet sandals. She checked armor herself, led patrols through the mud, and never once reached for a cone. Her vow had become sacred, and no one dared suggest abandoning it, even in the privacy of a smoky campfire. Every filthy strand was a reminder. The struggle wasn't over, but neither was their hope. Inside the rebel city, the mood had shifted from defiance to dread. At first, they'd mocked the siege, confident in their defenses. But as weeks wore on, cracks formed, both in the walls and in their spirits. Food ran low, tempers frayed, and rumors of desertion began to ripple through the ranks. The idea that the empire was led by a woman who refused to yield, even in the smallest things, gnawed at their confidence. Meanwhile, the city's leaders bickered, blaming each other for every setback, as if arguing would fill empty bellies. Then the inevitable happened. A moment of carelessness. A gate left unguarded in the dead of night, maybe the result of exhaustion, maybe a traitor's hand, gave Rodigan's scouts the opening they needed. Under cover of darkness, the soldiers slipped inside, silent and swift. By dawn, the city gates were thrown wide, and the Empire's banner unfurled above the battlements. Rodigan, her face streaked with ash and sweat, stood atop the walls, unwashed, unbowed, and more formidable than any myth could paint her. Victory didn't come with fanfare or golden trumpets. There were no roses, no parades. The triumph was declared with water. At last, after months of dirt, deprivation, and the kind of stress that would send a modern therapist running for the hills, Rodigan summoned her servants, not to a private chamber, but to a public courtyard. She wanted her soldiers to witness the end of her vow. Basins were hauled in, water was warmed, scented oils reserved for royalty were brought out like precious relics. Combs, long neglected, were handled with the reverence usually reserved for sacred artifacts. And there, under the open sky, Rodigan began to wash away the rebellion. The ritual was deliberate. Every tangle teased out was a city reclaimed. Every rinse of water carried away another insult, another challenge, another scar. Some say she wept, tears mixing with the water, grief and relief flowing together. Others remember her laughter, as sharp and sudden as the breaking of a siege. But there was no denying the spell that fell over the gathered troops. Hardened veterans, faces lined by sun and battle, stood transfixed. For a moment, even the birds seemed to hush. No crown was needed. The grime and dust had become her true diadem, a mark of victory more enduring than any jewel. With each twist of her hair, a piece of the Empire's pride was restored. Rodigan didn't need gilded robes or flattery. She had become the Empire's living symbol, a testament to grit, resilience, and the kind of courage that doesn't fade when the banners are taken down. And so, as the water carried away the last traces of war, Rodigan emerged not just clean, but transformed. The vow was fulfilled. The rebellion was over. And Parthia, for once, had more than a ruler. It had a legend. But the story doesn't end with freshly washed hair or a simple return to the palace. As we follow Rodigan back from the battlefield, the question lingers. What does a warrior do with peace? And how does an empire remember a woman who refused to play by its rules? She could have returned to court in triumph, let the scribes compose flattering odes, allowed nobles to fall over themselves in praise. Yet, as we'll see in the next chapter, legacy is never as simple as a victory bath. You might expect a hero's return to be all trumpets and roses, a parade rolling down marble avenues with the victors waving from gilded chariots. But as you step through the dust-choked street beside Rodigan, you quickly discover that this is not a story of silk banners or golden crowns. Instead of basking in royal favor or letting poets and nobles vie for her attention, Rodigan's path takes a different turn. Instead, she lingers in the mud and the grit with her soldiers. She shares their rough bread and thin stew, listens to their stories, most of them about wounds that never quite healed, or the way rebellion always smells like burning thatch and wet fur. You stand at the edge of their campfire, half expecting her to launch into a speech. But she's not here for speeches. She's here to listen. Legend has a funny way of beginning, not with a proclamation, but with silence. After the infamous hair washing, yes, the very one that will haunt every bathhouse tale for generations, Rodigan doesn't rush back to the capital. She doesn't ride a white stallion or command a retinue of 100 torchbearers. She takes the slow road, cutting a path through every battered city she's reclaimed. You walk those streets with her, the cracks in the stone echoing with her footsteps. She stops at every outpost, checks the battered gates, and inspects the walls still blackened by fire. She doesn't just look for victory. She hunts for any trace of rebellion that might be smoldering beneath the ashes, ready to flare up again if ignored. This isn't a victory lap. It's a warning and a lesson. Rodigan knows that nothing is more dangerous than comfort after conquest. Empires don't simply collapse because of an enemy at the gate. They rot from inside out, from the sweet poison of forgetfulness. She wants every last soul, loyalist, rebel, frightened child, peeking from behind a mother's skirt, to see her with their own eyes. Not as a distant princess, but as a woman who chooses the hardship of the march over the luxury of silk sheets. She walks the city lanes, not perfumed, but dirty and dog-tired, asking to see supply ledgers, demanding honest reports, listening to complaints about grain prices and missing husbands. She opens her war chest to pay for repairs, rewards some cities with new privileges for standing firm, and offers a measured mercy to those who kneel and confess their treachery. She never lets her guard down, not even when the tavern keepers scramble to serve her their last cask of wine. By the time she finally sets her boots on palace marble, her story has already spread like wildfire. The scribes can barely keep up, ink-stained fingers racing across scrolls as they try to capture every detail. Artists bicker over whether to paint her as a mud-drenched warrior or a radiant, newly crowned queen. Ministers gather in shadowed alcoves, whispering to each other. What do you do with a woman who's proven herself more capable than half the men in the dynasty? Some propose marrying her off, as if a strategic wedding could somehow dampen her legend. Others suggest entrusting her with the frontiers, hoping a distant assignment will keep her from outshining the king. But Rodigan herself seems utterly indifferent to these games. She doesn't chase titles or demand new lands. The battlefield was her throne. And the dust, yes, the same dust you still feel itching behind your ears, was her only crown. Her name is already etched in the minds of the common people, and no royal decree can make it shine brighter. She doesn't need a formal coronation. She carries victory in her very presence, and the people know it. In the months after her campaign, Rodigon doesn't seek the limelight, but it follows her anyway. She becomes the talk of the markets, the subject of 1,000 whispered poems and hastily carved statues. Soldiers who once marched under her command now boast of having seen her up close, each story growing wilder with every retelling. Her legend swells, not because she demands attention, but because she's earned it, step by muddy step. But inside the palace, where ambition is measured in whispers and soft shoes, her silence is a weapon all its own. She doesn't boast about her victories. She doesn't petition for power. She drifts through the corridors, her hair finely washed, but still unpretentious, woven with threads of memory, not gold. She listens more than she speaks. When she does speak, it's with the weight of someone who's seen the cost of every decision. Even the king, her father, or possibly her brother, depending on which thread of the family web you're following, moves carefully around her. Rodigan's popularity is a force unto itself. She's not loved for her bloodline or her beauty, but for her clarity in command, her refusal to break a vow, her willingness to wade through the mud with her troops. She's turned her private oath into public policy, her very filth into a badge of honor. The stillness she keeps now is as intentional as any battle formation. She doesn't reveal her plans, maybe because she hasn't decided what comes next. For the first time in years, she isn't at war. She isn't plotting or parrying. She just exists, and that unsettles everyone around her. What do you do with a woman who has conquered everything except her own restlessness? Some historians speculate that Rodigon wielded her silence like a sword. Her mere presence forced the powerful to think twice before speaking, made generals hesitate before launching new campaigns. If she raised an eyebrow, entire policies could tumble. She discovered that sometimes the most commanding act is to say nothing at all, to let others fill the silence with their own anxiety. And so she became a living legend, stalking the palace halls, her hair not just adorned with gold thread, but with the memories of every soldier and villager who witnessed her defy the odds. Her very existence rattled the foundations of tradition. Rodigan proved that the mitred Parthia did not reside solely in the hands of men. It could ride to war on a borrowed horse, return battered and unwashed, and stand unbent beneath the weight of 1,000 expectations. Now she simply waits. Sometimes the greatest move is to make no move at all. Time, as it does, begins to blur the lines of legend and fact. The official records start to shrink her down, careful scribes eager to spotlight kings and dynasties, rather than a rebellious princess who upended every expectation. There's no grand mausoleum for Rodigon, no state-commissioned epic poem that immortalizes her in gold leaf. But real legend doesn't need permission to survive. Out on the borderlands where her army once marched, in the towns she spared, her name lingers like a protective spell. Mothers repeat stories of her to their daughters, not as bedtime tales, but as warnings to anyone who doubts the resolve of a woman with a mission. Soldiers murmur her tactics as if they're holy scripture. Rebels, decades later, still speak of her as if she might rise again from the dust, hair wild as ever, to lead them once more. There's something deeply unsettling about someone who breaks every rule and still emerges victorious. Rodigan never agreed to be the ornamental centerpiece of a court. She didn't sit around painting birds, or playing the flute, or perfecting the art of being quietly overlooked. She crackled through her era like lightning, then vanished before anyone could pin her down. Historians can only speculate about her fate. Maybe she retired, finding peace in obscurity. Maybe she became the shadowy strategist behind the throne. Some romantics claim she rode out one last time to settle a border dispute and melted into myth. No one can say for certain. What's undeniable is that her legacy endures, not in marble, but in the living memories of the people who needed her the most. She never wore a crown, but she ruled in ways no official title could match. She changed the very definition of loyalty. She proved that a vow, even one as odd as refusing a comb, could become more binding than any royal edict. And while the official histories might reduce her to a footnote, the dust of Pathia still remembers her. You don't need a statue to be eternal. All you need is to keep your word and win. Centuries later, her story is a paradox, known in whispers, elusive in ink. No statue towers in her honor. No royal tomb boasts her name in jeweled script. Yet among those who cherish rebellion and resilience, she is as immortal as a force of nature. She didn't conquer new lands or sign earth-shaking treaties. What she conquered was expectation itself. In a world that expected women to wait behind silk screens while men bled and schemed, Rodigon tore down the curtain, marched out, bare feet, helmet in hand, hair still tangled from battle, and led the way. She didn't ask for command. She took it. And the empire didn't break, it followed. More than that, she taught her people a lesson that no law could enforce. Loyalty is not forged through fear, but through shared hardship. It's earned when a leader stands beside you in the mud, refuses comfort, and honors a vow longer than anyone thought possible. Rodigan was no saint. No legend ever is. Her story endures not because it was spotless, but because it was honest, tangled, muddy, real, just like her hair on the day of victory. In that grime was dignity. In that vow was a new kind of leadership, stronger than any jeweled crown. When her soldiers looked at her, they didn't see a princess. They saw someone who believed in the struggle more than in her own vanity. And that's the part history couldn't quite erase. Even now, long after Pathia is little more than sand and memory, Rodigan's name flickers back to life whenever resistance stirs. Artists rediscover her, writers chase her footprints, and somewhere a stubborn vow not to wash until justice is done makes perfect sense to those who suffered injustice themselves. She was never about glamour. She was all grit. In the end, it wasn't gold that crowned her, but dust. The same dust that emperors try to flee in death. The very dust she wore as a badge of honor. Kings forgot her, chroniclers overlooked her, but the soil remembers. And that's where legends are truly born, not in stone, but in the earth itself. So as you brush the dust from your own sandals and prepare to step into the next gallery, remember Rodigon's legacy. Sometimes, true power isn't about the gold you wear or the songs sung in your name. It's about the vow you keep, the hardships you endure, and the dust you claim as your own. Because before empires clashed and blood soaked the sand, there was always someone who dared to stand in the dirt and say, "Not yet. Not like this." And with that, we take our first steps toward the rise of Ptolemais, and the storm that would soon sweep through the world of Cyrus the Great. Step with me now into the windswept vastness of the ancient steppe, where the air cuts sharp and the horizon is as endless as the questions you're probably asking yourself about. Survival in a world without coffee, central heating, or even a decent pair of shoes. Here, A young woman named Tomius is not yet a legend, just a shadow flickering between grass and sky. The daughter of a people who measure their days by the gallop of horses and the sting of arrows. Forget marble halls and golden statues. Tomius's childhood is all grit and the rattle of hooves. Imagine waking up each morning to the howl of wind and the promise of hunger. No cozy Roman insula, no bustling forum, just a battered tent and the smell of horse sweat. If you picture a little girl carefully learning to stitch embroidery, you're in the wrong museum wing. Here, girls ride before they walk straight, and by the time Tomius is old enough to string a bow, she's already learned that you eat only what you can hunt, herd, or steal. Among the Massagetae, as they call themselves, survival means everyone pulls their weight, regardless of gender or age. The steppe does not hand out favors. Every day is a test, and the only prize is making it to tomorrow. Your lessons begin young. Ride with your back straight, shoot with both eyes open, never waste an arrow, and never show fear, especially not around the boys. In this world, the difference between child and warrior is measured in blood and bruises, and Tomius earns her place by bleeding alongside the rest. Her people worship no pantheon of marble gods. They look up to the sun and the endless blue, offering prayers to the wind. Their dead are sent into the earth with their weapons clutched to their chests, ready for battle in whatever comes next. Cities, they don't have them. Gold. Only what can be carried on horseback. Plumbing, please. Their pride is their armor, and when strangers threaten their land, they meet them not with supplication, but with the storm of arrows. Tomius's rise is not a fairy tale. It's a saga of grit and cunning. When her husband, likely a tribal leader of some standing, dies, she does not simply inherit a title. She claims it. In a world where most women are bartered like livestock, Tomius muscles her way to the front of the warband. She negotiates with kings as an equal, and when they scoff, she answers with steel. Tomius is not a queen with a crown. She's a war chief, streaked with dust and blood, her authority carved by the respect and the fear of those who follow her. They call her Shahut. On the steppe, that's not just a leader, but the one who decides if your children will have food next winter, or if you'll be left for the wolves. But power is a double-edged blade. As Tomius cements her rule, rumors coil through the grass. Far to the south, in a world of palaces and politics, another ruler has noticed the gathering storm. Enter Cyrus the Great, whose empire already swallows the lands of Lydia and Babylon. If you think your commute is stressful, imagine ruling an empire where your soldiers speak a different language every week, and your enemies multiply faster than you can count. Cyrus is not a man who sees borders. He sees opportunities. And the Massagetae, with their wild freedom and control of key trade routes, are too tempting a morsel to ignore. But Cyrus is a strategist. He's the sort who prefers to win with a bribe or a clever ruse before resorting to swords. So, he tries a classic move from the kingly playbook, the marriage proposal. Imagine getting a friend request from the world's most powerful man, only to realize he's really just trying to take over your people without the bother of a siege. Tomius sees right through him. To her, the offer is not romance, but a velvet-wrapped threat. Decline. Cyrus is not pleased. He's used to bending the world to his will, not being told no by a woman from the grasslands. So, with diplomacy dead, he turns to what he knows best, war. He orders his troops to cross the Araxes River, which is less a river and more a watery dare from nature itself. He builds a bridge of boats and marches his army into the heart of the Massagetae lands, convinced he can crush these nomads, as he's done so many others. But Tomius is already 3 moves ahead. She knows the land, knows the tricks of the steppe, and knows Cyrus is not after territory alone. He's out to shatter the woman who had the audacity to deny him. Let's pause at this next exhibit the Battle of Wits, Steppe Edition. Tomius, refusing to play by the conqueror's rules, pulls her forces back. She lures Cyrus and his men deeper into the grasslands, letting them think their advance has gone uncontested. Then, she leaves behind what looks like an abandoned camp, stocked with food and, crucially, wine. The Persians, unused to chasing ghosts, stumble upon the camp and indulge, convinced the Massagetæ have retreated in panic. A tactical blunder. That night, as the Persians sleep off their drunken feast, Tomius and her warriors strike. It is a massacre, swift, brutal, and unrelenting. Blood soaks the earth, and among the casualties is Tomius's own son, Sparapises, a commander and her pride. Some say he's captured, begs for death, and ends his own life rather than face humiliation. Others insist he falls in the chaos of battle. Either way, when the news reaches Tomius, something inside her fractures, then hardens into iron. Grief becomes fuel. Rage sharpens her resolve to a lethal edge. She sends Cyrus a message, no longer a warning, but a promise. You crave blood, I will give you more than you can drink. The vow isn't diplomatic poetry. It's a declaration of war from a mother who has nothing left to lose. The next battle will not be fought for territory or honor, but for vengeance. Dawn breaks over the steppe, painting the grass with the kind of gold that would make a Roman senator weep. Tomius stands at the front of her army, her face streaked with ash, her eyes fixed on the horizon. She's not a queen today. She's a hurricane in human form. Her warriors, faces painted with fury, ready themselves for the storm ahead. This isn't about politics anymore. This is blood for blood, a reckoning the likes of which the steppe has never seen. Cyrus, for all his legendary prowess, underestimates his enemy. He thinks the Massagetæ will scatter like so many other tribes. He expects chaos, not a coordinated assault. But Tomius is not most leaders. She is everywhere at once, rallying her archers, charging at the front, striking with a precision born from years of surviving on the knife's edge. The Massagetæ cavalry surge forward, arrows darkening the sky, axes flashing in the morning sun. To the Persians, this is not a battle, but a nightmare given form. Their lines buckle, then break. Some stand their ground and fall where they fight. Others flee, only to vanish into the endless grass, hunted down by Tomius's riders. And then, in the chaos, Cyrus the Great meets his end. Accounts differ. Some claim he dies fighting, others insist he's captured and executed on Tomius's orders. What matters is that the man who bested kings and toppled empires falls, not at the gates of a city, but on a nameless, blood-soaked field of grass. The world's most powerful king, brought low by the fury of a mother and the tenacity of a people the world called savages. What happens next is the stuff of legend, and also a lesson in the kind of poetic vengeance that would make even the most hardened Roman executioner wince. According to Herodotus, Tomius finds Cyrus's corpse among the fallen. She has his head severed, then orders it plunged into a wineskin filled with human blood. "Drink your fill," she says, her voice echoing across the plain. "You wanted blood, now take it." Is it true? Maybe. Is it myth? Probably. But in that moment, fact and legend become one, and the message is eternal. Tomius is nobody's victim. The Persian army is routed. The grass drinks deep, and the wind carries the tale to every corner of the known world. An empire that seemed invincible is humbled, not by the armies of a rival king, but by a woman from the wilds. The Persians, spinning their defeat as best they can, return Cyrus's body home for burial with all the trappings of royal honor. But the wound, personal and imperial, doesn't heal. The story of Cyrus's final defeat becomes a scar on the memory of an empire. For Tomius and her people, victory is more than revenge. It is a statement. a line drawn in the dirt of history. They have defended their way of life with more than swords. They have defended their dignity. Thommius has faced down the most powerful ruler on earth and forced him to kneel, not with ceremony or compromise, but with the raw, unfiltered resolve of the steppe. And then, as suddenly as she stormed onto the stage of history, she vanishes. No records tell us where her story ends. No chronicler writes of her final days. It is as if, having set the world ablaze, she simply rides away, leaving the wind to carry her legend. In the centuries that follow, her story echoes through the halls of power and the fireside tales of distant lands. The Persians remember her with bitterness. The Greeks, ever fond of contradictions, see her as both barbarian and noble. In Central Asia, she becomes a spirit queen, a rider in the night who cannot be tamed. Artists and poets reimagine her across the ages, armored and imperious in medieval manuscripts, towering in Renaissance paintings, always standing over the fallen king. She is a mother avenger, a wild queen, a warning to the arrogant, and a banner for those who dream of freedom. One fact rings out through the haze of myth. Thommius didn't inherit her throne. She forged it with fury and fire, in the face of an empire. And so, as you stand here, dust from the ancient plains swirling around your feet, remember, not every empire rises. Some are trampled under the hooves of those who refuse to bow. Thommius proved that even the greatest conquerors can fall, not to armies of equals, but to the wrath of those the world refuses to understand. Now, as the echoes of battle fade and the steppe returns to silence, we move from the blood-soaked grasslands to the strange twilight of memory. For what remains of Thommius is not found in royal archives or chiseled monuments, but in the stories that have survived the centuries. Much of what we know about Thommius comes not from local massage records. If you listen closely, as we step into this next shadowy diorama, you'll realize that her people weren't exactly famous for immortalizing their stories on stone pillars or lining libraries with their deeds. No, what survives of Thommius is filtered through the ever-dramatic quill of Herodotus, the man the Greeks crowned as the father of history, though any modern fact-checker would have a field day with his truths. Picture Herodotus. A century after Thommius's time, hunched over his scrolls, spinning her life into legend, for a Greek audience hungry for tales of hubris and comeuppance. To them, Thommius becomes the ultimate plot twist, a barbarian queen who brings down Cyrus the Great, not with legions or palatial intrigue, but out of raw maternal vengeance. Herodotus, of course, didn't just present a timeline. He staged a spectacle. In his hands, Thommius is both avenger and warning. He gives us the infamous wineskin of blood, the severed head of Cyrus, the chilling command, "Drink your fill." It's the kind of story that grips you by the throat, but you have to ask yourself, did it really happen like that? Even now, modern historians argue in circles. Some see Herodotus as an ancient tabloid writer, exaggerating or outright inventing whole scenes, using Thommius as a convenient stick to poke at Persian pride. Others say, well, maybe the blood-soaked wineskin is more metaphor than fact. But the central event, Cyrus dying at Thommius's hands, probably happened. Don't forget bias. Herodotus, for all his curiosity, always put a Greek filter on foreign worlds. To him, the Massagetai, Thommius's people, were wild, untamed, but still managed to reflect Greek ideals of freedom and honor in their own rough-edged way. In this frame, Thommius isn't just some barbarian chieftain. She's a literary device, a living rebuke to imperial arrogance, a mirror held up to Persia's ambition. Even as the facts blur, Herodotus nails one thing. He makes sure Thommius will never be just a footnote. He launches her into legend, where memory gets fuzzy, but impact only grows sharper. It's in that foggy realm that Thomius finds a peculiar kind of immortality. Now, let's step through the felt tent flaps and into the wind-swept steppes. Here, power isn't measured in marble or gold, but in sheer survival. Thomius never ruled from a throne or stamped her face on coins. Her people, the Massagetei, lived by the pulse of the land, the shifting sky, and always the ever-present horse. So her legacy was never carved in stone. Instead, it traveled from mouth to ear, campfire to campfire, a ghost story that haunted the night winds. The Massagetei weren't alone on these plains. They had cousins, the Scythians, the Saka, the Dahe, all tribes whose names now sound like half-remembered spells. But back then, they were the terrors of the known world, riding circles around the slow, lumbering empires. And here's a plot twist for you. Steppe culture wasn't nearly as allergic to powerful women as, say, Rome or Athens. Women here didn't just keep the fires burning. They rode. They hunted. They fought. Archaeologists have uncovered Scythian graves where women lie buried with their weapons and horse gear, their skeletons still gripping the handles of their daggers. So while Thomius was exceptional, she wasn't a unicorn. She stood at the peak of a tradition that let women earn respect through grit, not just bloodlines. Her authority didn't come wrapped in divine mandate or inherited robes. It was forged, day by day, in the harsh currency of respect and capability. But since her people wrote nothing down and built nothing that could outlast the wind, Thomius became a phantom. Her story survived as a murmur in the grass, a rumor in enemy chronicles, a haunting in the songs and memories of those who rode after her. Persian scribes remembered her as a warning: never underestimate a grieving mother. Greek storytellers made her an exotic marvel, a living challenge to their ideas of gender and power. To her own people, she was probably a memory that flickered like firelight, a name carried in battle songs and whispered before dawn raids. Empires can crumble into sand, but the stories of the steppe live on in the wind. And Thomius, fierce, grieving, and unyielding, became the wind's own voice. Centuries rolled by, and those mighty empires that once surrounded the Massagetei, Persia, Greece, even Rome, rose, swaggered, and finally collapsed in their turn. Cyrus's descendants built Persepolis, tangled with Alexander the Great, and then faded into the dusty margins of history. But Thomius's story stuck around, outliving palace intrigue and royal decrees. She didn't become a legend in marble halls, but in the hearts of those who refused to kneel. Across Central Asia, her legend became a symbol bigger than any one queen, a banner for female strength, resistance, and the wild spirit of the steppe. What's really wild is how her story keeps slipping out of the hands of empires. She was never truly Roman, Greek, or Persian, so nobody could claim her exclusively. That made her dangerous. It also made her irresistible to storytellers across cultures. Sometimes, medieval Islamic chroniclers would dust off her name, reshaping it for new audiences. Some praised her justice and righteous fury. Others painted her as a cautionary tale, a savage queen whose power unsettled the natural order of things. By the time the Renaissance rolled around, European artists rediscovered her through Herodotus's writings. They went full drama, painting Thomius in ornate, impossible armor, standing over the lifeless body of Cyrus, his head aloft in her grasp, her gaze fixed and uncompromising. It was part political statement, part historical cosplay, a celebration of a woman who didn't wait for permission to shape her own fate. Fast forward to the 19th and 20th centuries, and Thomius gets drafted into the national mythologies of Kazakhstan, Uzbekistan, Turkmenistan, places where the memory of the steppe still gallops just beneath the surface. Poets, teachers, and politicians held her up as proof that Central Asia's roots ran fierce and proud, and, crucially, feminine. Suddenly, Thomius was everywhere. Her name in textbooks, her likeness in statues, Even her story invoked military parades. A queen who once led on horseback, bow in hand, now rides again through memory and myth, a symbol of rebellion and pride. And this is where the legend gets truly prickly, because Thomius is still a challenge to the modern world, especially to anyone uncomfortable with the idea of a woman who leads, fights, and, when pushed, takes bloody revenge. She wasn't gentle or saintly, or a prop in someone else's story. Thomius was decisive. She could be brutal, but never capricious, compassionate only when it was deserved. In her, resistance became flesh, and the blood of empire was a crown she wore on her own terms. History, as we like to remind ourselves, generally prefers the builders, the kings who inscribe their names in stone, the lawmakers who leave behind scrolls and edicts. Thomius did none of that. No palace, no empire chiseling her face onto coins. And yet her name endures. Not because she built, but because she refused to be erased. She stands as a living contradiction to the way women are so often remembered in history, not as background characters, but as forces that bend destiny. Thomius didn't wait for recognition, she seized it. She never rode behind a king. She rode against one, and won. Step into any classroom from Central Asia to Europe, and you'll still find her story retold. Not just because she killed Cyrus the Great, but because she dared to defy him at all. She wasn't defending an empire. She was defending something harder to define: freedom. Freedom that thundered beneath the hooves of her horse. Freedom that hunted with falcons. Freedom that slept beneath the endless steppe sky. A freedom that can't be measured in miles or marked with walls. Today her statues rise from the bustling capitals of Kazakhstan. Her face minted on coins and etched into the memory of millions. For modern Central Asians, she's the mother of nations, a living thread reaching back to a time before Islam, before Soviet borders, to a proud nomadic past. She's a reminder that their culture was not born in submission, but in the cry of battle and the gallop of horses over wild grass. In a world still split by power, gender, and the unreliable tricks of memory, Thomius stands as a beacon, not just because she killed a king, but because she taught something even greater. Dignity isn't handed down. It's wrenched from the jaws of history. Sometimes, leadership looks like a mother, blood on her hands, refusing to let the killer of her son walk away unpunished. And that, in its own savage poetry, is as much a lesson as any golden law or marble monument. Why do some names survive while others vanish into dust? Thomius survived because she was unforgettable. Because when women were supposed to vanish into the tents of men, she burst out, blade flashing, heart burning, and carved her story into the flesh of history itself. Empires fall, statues tumble, even memory fades. But legends, those ride on. Somewhere, in the restless whisper of the steppe wind, a queen still gallops, unbroken, undefeated, utterly unforgettable. And as we let the wind carry us toward our next exhibit, you might be surprised to find that the next unstoppable force in ancient history isn't a queen or a conqueror, but a far smaller creature with wings. Step through the museum's next archway, and the air thickens with the scent of sun-warmed clay, beeswax, and something sweet that's a world away from your supermarket squeeze bottle. Welcome to ancient Egypt, where beekeeping isn't a pastime for quaint hobbyists in white veils. Here, it's a state project, scientific, sacred, and watched over by gods who, unlike you, don't mind getting stung. It's 2400 BCE. The Nile's annual flood has retreated, leaving behind a patchwork of green and mud. Along the riverbanks of Saqqara, under a sky so bright it makes your eyes water, you find a beekeeping scene immortalized in tomb paintings, painted not for Instagram likes, but for eternity. You spot rows of horizontal clay tubes, each one about the size of a hefty drainpipe, stacked neatly on their sides and shimmering in the midday heat. Forget wooden hives and protective gear. These terracotta tubes are lifted and moved with the seasons. As the wildflowers bloom, the hives are floated up or down the Nile on reed rafts, following the nectar trail, like ancient delivery vans. Except these vans are full of thousands of tiny creatures with daggers for butts. It's the original GPS, Global Pollinator System. Picture a beekeeper, a lean, sunburned figure, crouched at the hive's mouth, blowing smoke through a clay pipe to soothe the swarm inside. No mesh mask, no gloves, just experience, timing, and the kind of courage you only get when your boss is the high priest. The bee's quiet, and the keeper gently removes honeycombs, sticky and golden, careful not to damage the colony. Every drop of honey is precious, not just for the table, but for the temple, the sickbed, and the afterlife. You watch as honey is poured into ceramic jars, sealed with clay, and marked for its destination, some to be mixed with herbs and wine in remedies, some destined for mummification rituals, and some to be burned as a fragrant offering to the gods. To the Egyptians, honey isn't just food. It's the literal stuff of legend. According to myth, bees are born from the tears of Ra, the sun god, as they fall to earth. This isn't just poetry. It's a worldview. Bees are messengers, the only creatures trusted to move between the realms of mortals and the divine. The hive is a microcosm of order, balance, and sacred harmony, supervised by beekeepers who might as well be priests. You see honey used as currency, exchanged for goods and services, and offered up in the hope of earning celestial favor. In medicine, it's the star ingredient, found in over 500 remedies scrawled on brittle papyrus scrolls. You see it mixed with everything from wine to donkey milk, slathered on wounds, dabbed on infections, and spooned into the mouths of the desperately ill. Egyptians know honey heals, even if they don't talk about bacteria. Beeswax, too, finds its way into cosmetics, writing tablets, and the embalmer's toolkit. Here, every scribe, priest, and healer owes something to the hive. In this world, the hive isn't just an insect colony. It's a sacred trust, cultivated with methodical care, watched over by both human hands and the all-seeing eyes of the gods. Egypt gives beekeeping structure, sanctity, and a sense of cosmic importance. But as you shuffle along the museum tour, the scent shifts, the lighting dims, and you step into Mesopotamia, the land of ziggurats, cuneiform, and the world's first great legal codes. Here, beekeeping isn't splashed across tomb walls or celebrated in mythic poetry. It's found in the dry, bureaucratic language of clay tablets and law codes. The air is thick with the smell of mud brick and distant incense. You pass through a garden attached to a temple or royal estate. It's quiet, save for the low hum of bees, apiaries, or ninzas, carefully maintained behind reed fences. In Mesopotamia, honey production is a privilege of the elite, tightly controlled and measured. Temple scribes jot down inventory. Every jar of honey and block of wax is accounted for, destined for offerings, healing, or trade. You pause by a replica of the Code of Hammurabi. Most of it's about broken limbs, lost property, and the price of a decent ox. But here, almost hidden, are the bee laws. If your bees swarm into a neighbor's field and cause mayhem, you're on the hook. If someone steals your honey, restitution is due, sometimes in silver, sometimes in precious honey jars. Honey, in a world ruled by grain and barley, is valuable enough to warrant its own legal protection. And if you think this sounds like a medieval HOA, you're not far off. In Mesopotamia, order is everything, even if it means dragging a bee dispute into court. Bees are more than just insects here too. Some scribes call them divine messengers, linking them to Ninut, the god of agriculture and war. Beeswax is prized for its utility, sealing documents, making magical figurines, and binding the mundane to the mystical. You try to picture the hives themselves. The archaeological record is frustratingly vague, but scholars imagine mud brick, reed or basket hives, tucked into shadowed corners of rooftop gardens, kept cool in the brutal summer. Beekeeping isn't for the faint of heart, or the careless one wrong move and you're in a legal nightmare, not just a swarm of angry bees. In Mesopotamia, beekeeping is less about worship, more about systems. The hive is a symbol of law, order, and the civilizing urge. Even here, among the world's first cities, a bee sting might turn into a lawsuit. You move on, past clay tablets and dried mud, and the museum's air cools as you climb into the highlands of Anatolia, Hittite country. Now, the landscape is rugged, dotted with forests and wildflowers. The Hittites, practical but mystical, treat bees as sacred agents, pure and powerful. Here, bees aren't just farmed, they're revered. You enter the scene of a ritual. A Hittite priest, robed and solemn, summons a bee during a purification ceremony. The bee is asked to carry away evil, impurity, and the wrath of the gods. Unlike most sacrificial rites, the bee is released, not killed, a rare mercy in a world where almost everything is expendable. Honey is poured out in libations, mixed with wine and milk, and offered to the spirits. It's burned in sacrificial flames, blessed in anointing rituals, and used to cement bonds between humans and the divine. Hittite beekeepers work in the shadow of temples, tending hives likely made of clay, straw, and mud, portable, stackable, and familiar to anyone who's seen an Egyptian apiary. But here, the work belongs to the priests. It's woven into the rhythm of the kingdom's spiritual life, part of festivals and state ceremonies. Honey is more than a sweet treat. It's a diplomatic tool, a healer's salve, and a bridge to the gods. Even the migration of bees is noted in Hittite texts, an early recognition of the complex relationship between nature and culture. The hum of bees is not background noise. It's a sacred frequency, vibrating through the very bones of kings and gods. Your tour guide, still me, still sardonic, ushers you forward into Greece, where everything is philosophy, and even beekeeping gets the Socratic treatment. The air is scented with thyme and wild oregano, and a chorus of cicadas drowns out the distant sea. Here, the hive is a metaphor, a living model for the ideal city-state. The Greeks don't just farm bees, they idolize them. You watch a Greek beekeeper, perhaps an ex-philosopher, now a practical man, gently lifting the lid off a terracotta hive, which is cleverly designed with removable sections. This is not a smash-and-grab operation. These hives are engineered for sustainability. The beekeeper puffs smoke into the entrance using a ceramic bellow, sedating the colony for a careful harvest. It's an early lesson in both animal husbandry and not getting yourself killed. Greek innovation shines here. By designing hives that allow honeycomb to be removed without destroying the colony, they set the stage for modern apiculture. Multiple harvests per season become possible, and the bees are none the worse for wear, except, of course, for the occasional sting. Aristotle himself, probably the world's most famous bee nerd, studies the hive with obsessive detail. In his notes, you find the first recorded observations of specialized roles. Some bees gather nectar, others guard the entrance, and one, the so-called king bee, seems to rule. He gets the gender wrong, but you have to give him credit for noticing the organization. Honey in Greek life is everywhere. It sweetens wine, preserves fruit, flavors cakes, and forms the base of medicinal salves, especially for wounds. The Greeks believe ambrosia, the food of the gods, is a blend of honey and wine. Bees are sacred to Artemis, goddess of wild things, and Demeter, goddess of the harvest. Priestesses of Artemis are even called Melissa, the word for bee, a subtle nod to the hive as a symbol of feminine power and divine order. To the Greeks, the hive is both a scientific marvel and a spiritual emblem. By understanding bees, They believe they're unlocking the laws of nature, and maybe peeking at the secrets of Olympus itself. Now, brace yourself as we lurch forward into Rome, where beekeeping is all about scale and ambition. The scent of sweet fermenting grapes mingles with wood smoke and the distant tang of livestock. Rome doesn't do anything by halves, and beekeeping is no exception. The humble hive becomes an industrial operation, spread from the vineyards of Gaul to the olive groves of Hispania, and everywhere in between. The Romans inherit their know-how from Greeks and Etruscans, but then they ramp it up to empire level. On this stop of the tour, you see an entire villa dedicated to honey production. Enslaved laborers tend to rows of hives, hollow logs, clay tubes, woven baskets sealed with mud or dung. Innovation is key. In colder climates, hives are packed tight for warmth. In the sultry south, they're ventilated to keep the bees from cooking alive. You watch as a Roman keeper calms his bees with the smoke from a clay pot filled with thyme and oregano. The smoke not only sedates the bees, but might even flavor the honey. Harvesting is done with iron knives, a far cry from the gentle touch of Egyptian priests. Wax is separated through melting and straining, destined for everything from candles to waterproofing ships. Honey is omnipresent, drizzled over cheese, mixed into wine to make balsam, baked into cakes, and slathered on wounds. Roman athletes and soldiers gulp it down for energy, centuries before anyone thought of Gatorade. Physicians, following Hippocratic traditions, prescribe honey for sore throats, ulcers, fevers, and more. Its antibacterial powers are legendary and, unlike most Roman medicine, actually effective. But the most Roman element of all is the paperwork. Every large estate keeps ledgers, recording the flow of honey, wax, and profit. Surplus is shipped off to distant provinces, feeding not just the local market, but the hungry maw of the empire. Bees are more than insects here. They're productive citizens, model workers, in a state that prizes order and efficiency above all else. The hive is a metaphor for Rome itself, disciplined, organized, and endlessly fruitful, unless, of course, you're the one doing the actual work. For the average Roman, beekeeping means sweat, stings, and the occasional lawsuit over a runaway swarm. So, as you exit this gallery, you've seen beekeeping as sacred science in Egypt, legal code in Mesopotamia, mystical ritual in Anatolia, philosophical marvel in Greece, and industrial powerhouse in Rome. Across centuries and empires, the hive is never just a box of bugs. It's a living symbol, a source of sweetness and healing, a microcosm of society's deepest ideals and anxieties. Bees, it turns out, were never just for honey. They were for everything: law, medicine, magic, and the hope that something small and fragile could hold the world together. And as you move toward the next wing of our museum, keep that in mind. The legacy of these ancient hives didn't end with the last jar of honey. While ancient civilizations cultivated bees for honey and wax, many also saw the hive as a doorway to the divine. Step with me now into a sun-baked courtyard on the edge of an ancient city. Here, surrounded by the low hum of bees, you find yourself at the threshold of a world where insects are far more than mere background noise. In the ancient world, bees were not just creatures to be tolerated or swatted away. They were revered, immortalized, and even feared. You might picture a simple farmer tending hives for a bit of honey on his morning bread. But in truth, the relationship between humans and bees ran far deeper, running straight through religion, medicine, and the earliest experiments in technology. Let's start in Egypt, under the relentless glare of the sun. The air shimmers with heat, and somewhere in the distance, the Nile snakes through the land. Here the bee is nothing less than a sacred envoy. You hear the echo of a myth. When the sun god Ra wept, his tears hit the parched earth and sprang to life as bees. In this telling, honey itself becomes a divine material, offered in temples to placate the gods, or tucked lovingly beside the dead, a passport to a sweeter afterlife. Even the pharaohs, in all their gold-plated glory, borrow the bee's symbolism. The rulers of Lower Egypt brand themselves as he of the sedge and the bee, a title that links their authority to the orderly, mysterious realm of the hive. Think of it as a royal endorsement by the bees for the people. Travel west across the sea, and you find yourself among the olive groves and rocky hills of Greece. Here the bee is charged with feminine power and spiritual vitality. In the hush of twilight, priestesses gather in the shadowy sanctuaries of Demeter and Artemis, their title whispered in awe, Melissa's the bees. These women are not merely keepers of ritual. They are believed to channel divine messages, standing with one foot in the mortal world and the other in the realm of gods and prophecy. Some say the famed oracle at Delphi was once guided by bee priestesses, their rites lost to all but the hum of the hive. Even the Pythia herself, the enigmatic voice of Apollo, was sometimes referred to as the Delphic bee. The hive, to Greek philosophers and mystics, becomes a living model for society, disciplined, harmonious, and industrious. If you listen to the Stoics, you'll hear them extolling the bee's unwavering sense of duty, their sacrifice for the collective. It's a far cry from our modern chaos. Even early Christians, never missing a chance to borrow a good symbol, saw bees as paragons of chastity and resurrection. After all, bees create but do not last, and they die in defense of their home, a tidy metaphor for spiritual purity, if you're in the market for one. Head east, and you'll find yourself in Mesopotamia's bustling city-states, where magic and daily life intermingle like river mud and reeds. Here, bees are woven into rituals of purification and protection. Imagine a Hittite ceremony. A live bee, thought to absorb the community's sins, is released to carry away impurities, its tiny body now a vessel for spiritual renewal. Honey and wax are burned in sacred fires, their smoke curling up to the gods, or shaped into amulets and pressed into magical incantations. An ancient insurance policy against bad luck and illness. If you're starting to think the ancient world was obsessed with bees, you're right. But the reverence wasn't just mystical. It was practical, sometimes desperately so. Honey was the ancient world's miracle medicine, applied to wounds, used as a preservative, and prescribed as a cure, all centuries before anyone had heard the word bacteria. To the people living in these ancient lands, honey was more than just a treat. It was survival in a jar. Let's revisit Egypt for a moment, this time in a physician's shadowy chamber, lined with clay jars and pungent herbs. Here, honey is a staple of the healer's toolkit. The Ebers Papyrus, written around 1550 BCE, lists honey in over 500 medical recipes. You see it mixed with milk to soothe a sore throat, with figs to ease a troubled stomach, or with garlic and herbs to treat festering wounds and inflamed eyes. If you burn yourself while cooking or working under the sun, honey is daubed on the injury, mixed with animal fat or resin to speed healing and keep infection at bay. The Egyptians didn't know about hydrogen peroxide, but they knew what worked. Now, over to Greece, where Hippocrates, the so-called father of medicine, is busy handing out advice. He prescribes honey for everything, from respiratory complaints to ulcers and sheer exhaustion. You find him mixing honey with vinegar to make oxymel, a tiny tonic meant to clear out phlegm and cool a fever. One to train for the Olympics. Greek athletes gulp down honeyed water, convinced it will restore their energy faster than wine or plain water. It's not Gatorade, but it's the best science can offer for the next few centuries. Not to be outdone, ancient India brings its own reverence to the table. In the Ayurvedic tradition, honey, or madhu, is classified by taste, source, and its ability to heal. Medical texts warn against overheating it, but recommend honey for indigestion, coughs, wounds, and even as a treatment for poisoning. It's mixed into sacred offerings and consumed during holy fasts, intended to purify both body and spirit. No matter where you turn, honey is both medicine and sacrament. And then there's Rome, where the practical meets the experimental. Pliny the Elder, everyone's favorite natural historian, catalogues dozens of honey-based remedies. You'll find honey in ointments, gargles, and even as a battlefield anesthetic. Mix it with poppy juice, and you've got an ancient sedative, one that might, if you're lucky, dull the pain of an arrow wound or a tooth being yanked out. Roman surgeons keep honey close at hand to prevent infection and reduce swelling. And beeswax is pressed into service as a base for balms, plasters, and even rudimentary dental fillings. That's right. Open wide for a fresh beeswax crown. It's easy to laugh at these ancient remedies from the comfort of your modern medicine cabinet. But if you step back into their shoes or their leather sandals, you realize honey was as close to a miracle drug as most people would ever get. It healed the sick, mummified the dead, and symbolized a purity that people could only aspire to. But beekeepers of the ancient world weren't just mystical healers or religious devotees. They were inventors, engineers, and sometimes the only thing standing between a community and starvation. Across civilizations, these early apiarists developed ingenious tools and strategies to care for their hives. Think of them as the original tech startup founders. Only their office was a field, and their employees all had wings and stingers. Hive design was an early arena for innovation. The Egyptians favored long, horizontal tubes of clay, stacked neatly and resembling massive, sun-baked pasta shells. These hives were durable and portable, mimicking the natural cavities bees preferred. In Greece and Rome, you find woven basket hives and terracotta cylinders, some even fitted with removable lids. This little tweak is revolutionary. With a removable lid, you can check on the bees or harvest honey without destroying the entire colony. Suddenly, you're not just taking from nature, you're working with it, laying the groundwork for sustainable agriculture. Of course, getting honey out of a hive without becoming a human pincushion is no small feat. Enter the ancient smoker. The Greeks invent clay pots and bellows to send calming smoke into hive entrances, masking the alarm pheromones that would otherwise send the bees into a defensive frenzy. The Romans, never ones to pass up a chance to improve a gadget, start burning fragrant herbs like thyme and oregano. Not only do the bees calm down, but the honey might even take on a subtle hint of flavor. It's the ancient version of artisanal infusions, just with more risk of stings. Harvesting honey was a delicate operation. You'd use a wooden or bronze knife to slice off the comb, careful not to destroy the whole structure. Sometimes, the honeycomb was pressed to extract every last drop, and the leftover wax was melted down and filtered. Protection. Forget about bee suits or gloves. You learn to move slowly, avoid sudden gestures, and trust your experience. And if you got stung, you just try to look dignified about it. Beekeepers were as much behavioral scientists as they were farmers, watching carefully for signs of swarming, tracking the bloom cycles, and even moving their hives to chase the best flowers. This practice, known as transhumance, is the ancient answer to modern migratory beekeeping. Storing honey was another science. Egyptians sealed their honey in ceramic jars, guarding it from moisture and spoilage. The shelf life was legendary. Archaeologists have opened tombs thousands of years old and found honey still edible inside, outlasting empires, plagues, and probably most of the people who made it. If you're looking for a food with a better expiration date, you won't find one. But perhaps the most surprising part of ancient beekeeping is how spiritual care blended with practical know-how. You didn't just tend the bees, you performed rituals to please the spirits or gods believed to reside in the hive. A well-placed offering or a whispered prayer could mean the difference between a thriving hive and a disastrous season. This spiritual insurance policy was every bit as crucial as any tool or technique in the beekeeper's arsenal. So what does all this add up to? Ancient beekeeping was never just agriculture. It was a blend of craft, science, and reverence, a centuries-long experiment in how to live with and learn from the smallest of creatures. The tools and methods hammered out under the desert sun, or in the shade of an olive tree, echo in modern beekeeping. The careful design of hives, the use of smoke, the understanding of bee behavior, and the art of sustainable harvest. Even today, when we move hives to pollinate almond orchards, or study bees to unlock the secrets of resilience and cooperation, we're following in the footsteps of those ancient keepers. And if you think the story of bees ends with a pot of honey, think again. The medicinal knowledge passed down from Egypt, India, and Rome shaped the early pharmacopoeias of the world. Honey's antibacterial magic is still tapped for wound care in some hospitals. Beeswax found its way into cosmetics, art, and construction, while the spiritual symbolism of the hive lives on in religious ceremonies, art, and even corporate team-building exercises. The idea of bees as messengers, as mediators between worlds, still buzzes through our collective imagination. We even know the modern concept of migratory beekeeping, moving hives to follow the bloom to these ancient innovators. Their understanding of nature's rhythms helped them survive, and their respect for the bee's role in the ecosystem prefigured our own anxious dependence on pollinators. Today, as we fret about declining bee populations and the future of our food supply, the lessons of the past feel more urgent than ever. So as you leave this living diorama, brushing a phantom bee from your sleeve, remember, humans and bees have been locked in this strange, beautiful dance for millennia. We've shaped each other, for better and for worse. The legacy of ancient beekeeping is a monument to survival, ingenuity, and the stubborn hope that even the tiniest wings can carry the weight of civilization. And if you're tempted to romanticize the past, well, just picture yourself in a linen tunic, chasing swarms across a baking field, sticky with sweat and honey, hoping the gods are on your side. No air conditioning, no bug spray, and definitely no coffee. Just you, the bees, and a history still humming beneath the surface of our modern lives.